barking at home. There is a lot to it. So this is going to be more of an overview. I am going to give you specific things that you can do for your dog's barking, and I'll explain what I mean later. But some types of barking are not an easy fix, and so I'll just explain those later when we get to them. So if you don't know, I'm Ruth Hegarty. I founded Creature Good Dog Training, which is a positive training company that specializes in fear-based behavior, anxiety, things like that. And that is probably 90% of what I do is work with fearful, reactive, aggressive, separation anxiety, those kind of issues. And I love doing it. So a lot of what I talk about will have that aspect to it. So today what we're going to go over in the next hour is why your dog barks. There are several different reasons why your dog barks. Some environmental solutions, temporary and permanent enrichment solutions, how to teach a quiet cue, which is the cure for certain types of barking. And then we'll talk about desensitizing and counter conditioning a dog, which is the cure for other types of barking. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end. All righty. So the reasons dogs bark, barking is talking, right? Dogs communicate non-verbally with their bodies, but they also communicate by making different sounds: whining, crying, growling, barking. And so barking is an important aspect of their life and how they communicate with each other and with us. And except for that one breed of non-barking dog, all dogs bark. And to some extent, barking is a good thing. You want your dog to bark under certain situations, to let you know their foot is stuck in something and they need help, or if someone's trying to break into your house and they're barking to scare that person away. These are good things. But a lot of the barking that we get is what we consider nuisance barking, and that's what we don't want. So some of the reasons that dogs bark, and I'll share how you can tell too, is alert barking, right? That's your dog barking to say, hey, somebody walked by the house, or there's a squirrel in the yard, and maybe we should deal with it. That's one reason they bark, and that's fine, they can do that. Boredom barking is a problem. So if your dog is bored, sometimes barking, it's sort of like singing in the shower. You just do it to entertain yourself, and they'll just bark for fun because they're bored and they have nothing else to do. So we'll talk about that and solutions for that. Attention barking, which tends to be really, really annoying to most humans. And that's when your dog sort of barks in your face incessantly because they want you to give them something, treats, attention. They just want you not to be doing what you're doing. It is sometimes caused by nerves because they want your constant attention. It's sometimes caused by boredom and they want you to entertain them. But that's the one that we'll talk about the quiet cue for primarily. There's also protection barking. Some dogs will do that, protecting their territory, protecting their person. It's can be a type of reactivity where they're nervous that their territory, and by territory, they could be as far as the eye can see. It's up to the dog what they think their territory is, but that's another reason that they bark. And then fear, anxiety, stress, which is your dogs that sort of, we talked about last month, barking on leash. That's one piece of it. But then my dog Shadow does this too, where she barks out the window at anything that goes by to let it know.
How much lasagna do you think you want?
Sorry. Can everybody put themselves on mute? If you don't mind, it's down the bottom of the screen, probably to the leftish. And separation anxiety, that's another reason that dogs bark. And that's the barking where when you leave, they bark nonstop when you're gone because they can't handle you being gone. Separation anxiety is very difficult to deal with. It's a real big challenge, but it is also 100% curable. Reactivity is sometimes 100% curable, sometimes not. So it depends, and we'll talk about how you deal with those. But those are the ones when I said in the beginning that this class isn't going to solve that problem. It's because it's a more in-depth situation, but we will talk about it. But we'll sort of address the more simple ones first. And the first couple of things that we're going to talk about are going to be good for all of these types of barking, including separation anxiety, including reactivity. So environmental solutions. Positive trainers, one of the things we do first, no matter what we're training a dog, is we look at the environment. What can we change, add, remove from the environment that's going to help the dog behave the way that we want? And so if you have a dog that, say, sits and barks out the window, you can block their access to the window. Put film on the window, put curtains, put a chair or a piece of furniture in front so they can't get to it. Now, funnily enough, looking out the window is nice enrichment for dogs. So if you can manage, and it's doable, is give your dog opportunities to look out for the enrichment factor, but have it be supervised so that they're not getting to the point where they're just there barking out the window. Barking out the window can be done out of boredom. It can be done out of reactivity. It can be done for alert. They might look out there and most of the time they're quiet and then they do a bark to let you know that they saw a rabbit. The occasional bark, I feel, is fine. I'm not in your house. You decide how much barking is appropriate. Constant barking is not good for anyone. Constant barking typically means the dog is not happy any more than you're happy with it. So that's what we tend to address. The first place to look is the environment. How can you reduce the barking or eliminate the barking with changes to the environment? And sometimes those can fix the problem 100%. You're like, oh, well, that fixed it. Now I don't have to worry about it. And sometimes they diminish it so that you can train the dog to do something else. You always want to do your best to stop a behavior before you then train the new behavior so that you're not having this conflict of behaviors. So, and it's also low-hanging fruits. The easiest thing to do is to change the environment, typically. So enrichment solutions are going to be really good for your bored barking. They can be good for attention barking too, because it gives the dog something to do. You might have to teach the dog that they can entertain themselves. Sometimes dogs who bark for attention just haven't learned how to entertain themselves. And so you might have to take a while to keep redirecting them to these enrichment activities, their toys, licky mats, just whatever it is, until they figure out that they're able to do that themselves. Enrichment activities also help to tire out a dog, so that dogs that might feel anxious and bark out of a certain level of anxiousness, tiring them, enriching their mental wellness and their emotional wellness through toys and puzzle games and things like that, reduces anxiety, builds confidence. And so then you're addressing that anxiety piece of barking and you can help reduce it. Sometimes it can be a complete solve for the problem. Most often, if you have an anxious dog, it's just a piece of the puzzle. But it's fun. It's a nice way for you to bond with your dog if you're doing, maybe take an agility class together or you play together. And then if you're needing your dog to entertain themselves, then there are lots of enrichment things that you can do so that they're focused on something that's entertaining to them, so that they're not thinking, what am I going to do with myself? I'm bored. Maybe I'll bark at everything. And so it can be a really nice solution that hits a lot of levels in the sense of stopping the behavior or diminishing the behavior so that you can train other behaviors, and also just giving the dog a heightened level of security and comfort and entertainment. Basically, enrichment for dogs is entertainment. It's sort of like a doggy social life without playmates. So then to teach the quiet cue for a dog. So this is good. I use this for dogs that are attention barking, even though we'll do other things too. So typically, whenever I'm going to work with a dog, let's say he's attention barking, I'm going to look at the environment. I'm going to add an enrichment. But then we also want to address directly the behavior itself. And so when you want to teach a quiet cue, it's easy to teach. Everything's easy to teach, and then you have to practice it a bit. But what you do is when your dog is barking, you take a high value treat, something your dog will really want. You show it to the dog and say, quiet, or whatever you want to use as a word. But I always say quiet. Your dog will look at the treat and want the treat. And so they'll stop barking because now they're focused on the treat. They want that treat. Once they're quiet, wait a few seconds, wait 3 to 5 seconds. And the reason for that is your dog has a 3 to 5 second window of time where they will associate what they just did with what came directly before. So let's say your dog is barking. You show them the treat and say quiet and give them the treat right away. The dog is more likely to associate getting the treat for barking than they are for being quiet, because they haven't been quiet. You've just said quiet. So you want to show them the treat, say quiet, and count to 5 in your head, and then give the dog the treat. You can add in a good quiet or whatever you want. And then as you practice it, you lengthen the time. So once your dog gets good at it, you lengthen the time that you're waiting. So they understand better and better that quiet is what you're looking for. And then an up level to that is you say quiet before you show them the treat. If they stop barking, that means they understand what quiet means. If they don't, that means you have to step back, go back to showing them the treat. That's one of the ways to test it. It's always okay to take a step back. Sometimes we get excited and we move forward too quickly in a training, and our dog's not ready for us to go to that next level. So that's one way to test if they've understood the word. And the verbal cue, the word, is the last thing the dog's going to learn, because that's just not how they primarily communicate. So to teach them, show them the treat, say quiet, count to 5, give them the treat. If they can wait longer than 5, you can let them wait longer than 5. After a few times, say quiet without showing them the treat. And if they get quiet, that's awesome. Show them the treat, still do the count to 5 or 10 or whatever you've gotten up to. With practice, you'll be able to, from across the room, before you even take the treat out, your dog starts to bark and you say quiet, they'll be quiet and they'll come looking for their treat. Mm-hmm. This is good primarily for nuisance barking, boredom barking, attention-seeking barking. Once your dog is quiet, then you redirect your dog to do something else, because sometimes what a dog will do is they'll be quiet, they'll get their treat, and then they'll say, thank you very much. And they'll go back to what they were doing before because it was fun, and barking out the window or barking at you. Sometimes, wait, I'm going to leave that for after. Let me say this first. So you teach the cue, you redirect to another activity, or close the curtain, whatever it is, if they're barking out the window. If they're barking at you, redirect them to something else. Now, sometimes a dog, because they're very smart, they'll realize that when they stop barking, they get the treat. And so you might notice that your dog will come up to you, bark at you, and then be quiet and sit and wait for their treat. If your dog starts to do that, stop giving them the treat when they do that, right? And only give them the treat when you ask them to stop barking. Because otherwise, they're teaching you when to give them the treat. and just see that as a sign that they're understanding what's going on. But they can be very clever and finesse their humans. The other piece of it is you can, outside of directly asking them to be quiet, when you're practicing or when they're just in the middle of their day and they start to bark, is you can reward them for being quiet at other times. So say your dog is just sitting around playing with his toys and he's not being noisy. You can say to your dog, good quiet, nice quiet, and give a treat or a pet or nothing. You can just say it. That will help to reinforce for them that it's the quiet, it's the not barking that you're looking for. And the more you practice, just like with everything in life, the more you practice, the quicker your progress will be, and the faster everything will turn around. You want to make sure that the treat is worth being quiet for. So if you try this and your dog doesn't stop barking, get a higher value treat. It's okay to start with something very low value if you want, a piece of kibble, to see if your dog's willing to work for it. Some dogs will. Other dogs won't. You'll have to go straight to the cheese. That's something you can do a little trial and error with. But it's an easy cue to teach, and you can use it for a lot of different things. Practice it, redirect your dog, and think of all of these things as being related. So we can't teach a dog a quiet cue in a vacuum, because if your dog is barking out of boredom, he's still going to be bored. And he might take the treat, he might do his best to be quiet for as long as he can, but if he's bored, he's going to then act out. So you still, even if you teach this to your dog, you still want to add an enrichment and look at the environment and all of those other things. Otherwise, you'll end up having to tell your dog to be quiet a million different times. We teach this, but ideally, we want our dog to give up this practice of barking excessively. So we don't want to get kind of caught up in just waiting for them to bark and asking them to stop because we've taught it to them. We want to also address why are they barking and what can we do about it. Now, you can't use this for separation anxiety, because separation anxiety is a very unique type of panic disorder in dogs, and they won't be able to be quiet under the circumstances of you leaving them. So we do other things for that. And I'll talk a little bit about that, how that works. So you want to use the quiet cue for demand barking, nuisance barking, alert barking, even if your dog tends to keep going with the alert. It might not work for if your dog is fear-based barking, like reactivity barking because they're frightened of the UPS truck or something. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. That's more of a desensitization, counter conditioning issue. You might be able to get away with teaching them the quiet cue under other circumstances. So for dogs who are barking based on negative emotions, fear, being upset, stress, you can teach this to them, but not in those moments when they're in that headspace, because they can't learn like that. Nobody can. So you can teach them at other times and then add it into the other work that you're going to do. I hope that makes sense. But it's much more straightforward if your dog is just barking out of boredom or they want your attention or something like that. Or barking because they want you to come see what they're doing or give them a treat or something like that. So that is how you teach that. Now, going back to separation anxiety and reactivity, this is where, and if you were here for last month's class, and if not, I can send a link to it, you address reactive barking even from inside the house the same way you do from outside the house. You figure out what the dog is reacting to. Trucks, the UPS truck, oftentimes it's things that stop in front of the house or things they're afraid of, like other dogs. You figure out their threshold, You desensitize them to the trigger, and you do that by giving them a safe distance from which they can see the thing, and giving them treats and having them, that moves into counter conditioning, change their emotional response to the thing. Let's say your dog is afraid of the UPS truck, and so when it stops on your street, they freak out. You might not be able to counter condition them from the window if your window, like my window, is 10, 15 feet from the street. So it's not far enough for my dog because she has this issue. So what you can do is go to a park or go somewhere where you can have a safe distance from the road. And every time a truck goes by, you say, hey, look at the UPS, and you give your dog a treat. And you start there. That's how you can get a threshold, a safe threshold when it's a window situation. And you do the process, and then you can move closer and closer and eventually get it so that you can do it from inside your house. And I know this is like the fourth time I'm going to say this exact same thing, but if you saw last month's class, we go into it in much more detail. So that for reactive barking, and you can sort of tell if you're not sure how to tell which thing your dog is doing, look at their body language. Do they seem scared or upset, right? Can you get their attention? So if you say their name, will they look at you? The more intensity that the bark has, the more likely it is to be sort of emotional, fear-based barking. The more sort of, I don't want to say laid back, but the less distress you sense from it, the more likely it is to be attention seeking or boredom. So you want to look at their whole body and see what they're doing. My dog Shadow, for example, when the mail carrier comes, she throws herself at the window. She freaks out. That's why there's barriers to the window. But this is what she did before I figured it out. She will literally throw herself at the window and scratch her little paws and act like she's going to bust through the window to fight the guy. She's clearly upset, right? And thinks that something really terrible is happening. And when she just wants my attention because I'm sitting and working and she wants my attention, she knows she's not allowed to bark at me. So sometimes if I don't see that she's there, and I try to pay attention to her, but if she has to go potty and I don't notice it right away, she'll come up to me and she'll just do one bark. Then she'll look at me like I was slipped out, And so her body language is 100% different. And that's just her being like, hey, dude, I have to potty. Take me outside. So you can, unless you have just had your dog for a week and you really haven't learned their signals, I'm guessing that you can tell what is sort of going on with your dog. And honestly, if not, send me a video of your dog barking and I will tell you. And then you'll know how to address it. So fear-based barking is a little bit more difficult. Now, separation anxiety is, in order to treat it effectively, you have to suspend your absences from your dog because that's what's traumatizing them. And then you figure out their threshold. And in this case, threshold isn't distance, it's time. And the time could be 5 seconds, it could be 5 minutes. And then there's formulas that we use, we being separation anxiety trainers, formulas that we use to determine how much to raise that time. And you practice, you go in, you go out, you go in, you go out, and eventually you raise the time. It's a very specific protocol that all separation anxiety trainers use, regardless of where we got our certification. There's a couple of schools that teach it, but it's, everyone has a little nuance here and there, but it's the same basic protocol that we all use. And again, if you don't know if that's what your dog has, honestly, send me a video and I will tell you if your dog has separation anxiety or if they're just bored or whatever it is that's going on. And then you'll know what you need to do to address it. Okay, so what we covered was reasons your dog barks. Those were the main ones. every once in a while, there's going to be some other random reason your dog barked. But for the most part, they fall under those categories of alert barking, boredom barking, attention barking, guarding, reactivity, separation anxiety. And so for all cases, you want to include environmental changes that are appropriate and enrichment. And then you get to, do I train them a quiet cue, or do they need to be counter conditioned, or do I need to do a separation anxiety protocol for this dog? So we talked about some of the environmental solutions. You can probably see them. I understand that in some people's houses, it's a lot easier to move furniture around than in other people's houses. In a perfect world, you could just arrange all your furniture to suit your dog's needs. That's not always possible, but to the best of your ability, take that into consideration. Enrichment solutions, honestly, you can never have too much enrichment. It's so good for your dog. It's so good for you. I mean, humans have enrichment too. We do it for our babies, you know, those, you lay your baby down on the floor and they have those things that you put over them and they can hit them with their feet and stuff. That's enrichment for babies. So there's tons and tons of different types of enrichment solutions. You could do a Google search for, you know, enrichment ideas for my bored Great Dane, and you're going to get a list of stuff. There's really a lot of stuff out there. Some really good people that are working on it and creating things, and you can DIY stuff, you can buy stuff. It's become a huge I don't know if industry is the right word, but there's tons of it out there, I'll say that. So we talked about the quiet cue. It's really basic and easy. Some trainers teach speak and then quiet. I usually go straight to quiet because it tends to be easier for the families that I work with. But if you see something that says teach speak and quiet, it's just adding another piece to what I talked about, and it's perfectly fine to do. And desensitizing, that's when we change, and counter conditioning is when we change a dog's emotional response to something that frightens them, from being frightening to being okay, and sometimes even good. Kind of like the way you might, a therapist might treat someone who has a phobia to mice or something like that, to change their visceral response to that thing, is similar to what that desensitizing and counter conditioning is. Okay, so I'm gonna just give you a couple of next step ideas, and then we'll do questions and answers. That's my dog Shadow. She's a handful, but I love her. So I know we kind of went through this kind of fast, but I'm gonna send you the recording. Put some of this into practice for whatever reason that your dog barks. Think about, you know, what could I do enrichment wise? What could I do? Try and be curious about it, have fun with it. Dog training is meant to be fun for you and your dog, an activity that you can do together that's good for your relationship. I think of it as sometimes, you know, you meet a new friend and you go to coffee and you talk, or you go play mini golf. You can think of training and doing enriching things together in that same way. So it helps you to get closer to your dog and understand your dog better. And you can work on training your dog in 5 minutes a day. So you don't need to have these big swaths of time where you're, you know, carving out 90 minutes to work on it. You can do 5 minutes here and there. And I'll send you out the recording, and I'm also going to include some additional resources, maybe some articles. Maybe I'll link to last month's class too, just to give you some supplemental stuff that's going to support what we talked about tonight. And then I'll also give you a link if your situation is really challenging or you have questions that I didn't address here, that you can just schedule a free coaching call with me. and I will talk you through figuring out what's going on with your dog and next steps for what to do about it. And as I said, if you're not sure why your dog is barking and you want to take a video of it and send it to me, you'll have my email when I send out the class to you. Go ahead and send me a link to a video of what your dog's doing, and I can let you know from looking at him or her why they're barking, what's going on with them. Okay, and these are just cute pictures of some of my clients who, yeah, all reactive dogs. So let me get out of this. Let's see. There we go. Not sure how to make this big. Stop sharing. There we go.